It is 7 o'clock. I call this meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion by Councilmember Sayre
Well, I'll second that.
and a second by Councilmember Hirschman. So tonight, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but we have a special guest, so I would like to, Brent, if it's okay, have Augustine call a roll call vote for everything. Okay, cool. Have at it.
Hi,
Just first, we're going to do the roll call vote for this, so you just go through. Councilmember Sayre, we'll start.
Councilmember Sayre,
Yay.
Councilmember Mock,
Aye, Christy Mock.
Councilmember Hirschman,
Aye. Councilmember Pershman.
and Mayor Johnson.
Aye. All right. Motion passes. We have approved the agenda. So now we're up to community comment. So this is what I was telling you about. If we have members of the community who want to participate, and because we went through COVID, as you did, we also broadcast these meetings live. So somebody could be in their bathrobe on their couch and participate in the meetings. We don't have anybody on the Zoom, it looks like, and all of these folks work for the city in one way or the other. So we don't have any members of the public tonight. But for our tens and tens of followers who are watching at home, I always say that as a joke, there's nobody watching. Not to make you nervous, I don't mean to make you nervous. But I would like to introduce Augustine. So before the holidays, Augustine reached out and said, I'm really interested in city government. I'd like to know what's going on, and he wanted to volunteer. And I said, well, we don't have any volunteer opportunities really, but how would you like to come to a council meeting? And here we are. So I'm going to ask you a few questions because you didn't feel quite comfortable. It's a little hard knowing where to go. But
Honestly, I was imagining that with a bigger Zoom crowd.
oh, okay. Well, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Augustine. I'm an 8th grader at Minnetonka, and I've always taken an interest in like civics and government. But lately, I've more indulged in that and decided I want to become a bureaucrat. And seeing as looking at like Ivy Leagues and stuff, I thought it's good to start trying to partake in that stuff, and also for enjoyment. And here I am, and that's a benefit of a small town. So that I can just email you, of course.
Certainly. Well, if there's anything that I can do to help you get into the Harvard of the Midwest, St. Cloud State, you let me know. Somebody better help Mr. Merrick. He seems to have something caught in his throat. Okay, so we're going to just work the way through the agenda, and then we'll have you do the roll call votes, which I'm going to need, as we all know, help remembering that. So that was the community comment. We didn't have any members of the public except for you, Augustine, so thank you for coming. Presentations and reports, 5.1, the certified levy overview. Mr. Hubner, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Manager, and City staff. It's good to be back. We had some good news last summer, and so we've been slowly and methodically working through the federal process to get ourselves in line for the federal allotment, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I wanted to give you an update on where we are with the levy. We have not seen each other probably since I think last year when I looked through my records at a council meeting, as there was no funding allocated in 2022 with the no bonding bill from the state legislature, so that program had run its course.
Push the right button.
Can you scroll down? Does that work?
Well, your cover page is beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the nice Carver colors on there.
Democracy in action.
Is it time to roll the batteries?
There we go. How'd you do that? Magic? All right, will it work from here again? There we go. All right. So we wanted to go back a little ways since it's been a while since we spent some time with you on the Carver Levee project. And we did have some scheduled events that we wanted to complete in 2022, but that was definitely dependent on receiving some additional funds from the flood mitigation program administered by the DNR. So just a little bit of background. In 2021, we did do some public engagement. We updated the design configuration, looked at property impacts and what the limits of the levee may be, and we updated the funding aspects and the funding requests from the legislature, and we talked about some next steps. So a little bit of background for folks that haven't been involved in the levee project very often. The current levee in the city of Carver has been removed from the Army Corps of Engineers safety program, which is a considerable risk to the community. If we have damage to the levee right now, the city must replace or repair that damage 100% on the city's cost. Whereas if you're in that Army Corps program, they would pay for 80% of that, and you'd pay for 20%. So that's a big issue, and we were removed from that program, and for a number of reasons. And one is the freeboard. That's the elevation of the top of the levee, the levee is not high enough in a number of places to provide protection to the level that the federal government would like to see that protection. We have clear zone issues where we have encroachments on the levee. Those are either trees or buildings that are within the levee envelope itself or 15 feet away from what we would call the toe where the levee meets the ground, and then 15 feet away. Those are areas that we have to have clear access to maintain. And then also seepage. The current levee does not have any seepage internal drainage per se. So levees are not impervious. A lot of people think that the levee is up there, no water can pass around it or under it. That's not really the case. We design them to allow water to pass safely under the levee, and then we deal with that water as it comes through and put it back over the top with our pumps in the levee. And we currently have no internal drainage system on this levee due to the era that it was constructed. So we have about 55 properties and businesses directly behind the levee that are protected by the levee. And right now, because the levee is also not certified by FEMA, those property owners cannot increase the value of their property through improvements or other items more than 50% of the value of the building structure. And that's a significant impact to those homeowners that want to upgrade or businesses that want to upgrade their properties, keep them modern, keep them looking good and nice. It's very easy to get to that 50% property value number. The other is that they all have to pay flood insurance, and the flood insurance premiums are fairly high in the Carver area for these businesses and homeowners affected by the Minnesota River floodplain.
Todd, can I ask a question about that previous slide on the being able to make improvements?
Sure.
Property value. Who monitors that?
It is the city that monitors that
Okay.
through your floodplain ordinances. And that, I know we've had some issues with some of the ongoing properties and the building officials as well, walking through the property values and where we're at.
Thank you.
Yeah. So some of the status update, we can go all the way back to 2021. We began exploring the feasibility of certifying the levee. The council reviewed some of the preliminary work in February of 2021. In March of that year, received funding from the DNR, and we got a local contribution from the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District for $150,000. And the council refined the work plan in April. And then in the summer and fall, we did some of the public engagement, the geotechnical survey, preliminary design, and construction limits, and then we updated our costs for the levee improvements. In 2022, we did a council work session. Like I said, we were here last year, and then we kind of disappeared for a year because the legislation did not do their job and received no funding actually nobody in Minnesota received bonding funding in 2022. So we're currently working with HUD, who is the administrator of the infrastructure federal money that the city has received $2.5 million on. And then we currently have a request into the state of Minnesota for bonding funds this year, and Mayor will give us an update more on that later. So 2021, the levee work goals that we had, we did the project communication engagement. We met one-on-one with several people. The geotechnical evaluations, one of the the rumors that's out there is there are cars buried in this levee. We have not found them yet. Doesn't mean we won't, but the geotechnical work did not reveal any cars in the levee. We completed detailed surveys of the levees and the structures adjacent to the levee so we can define the limits of construction so that as we get into the next phase, we can start understanding, will we need to buy easements or permanent right-of-way from individuals or others and businesses to look at the construction project, not only permanent, but also construction. If we need some access in some places, we'll know where those limits will be. And then we refine the costs. I'm going to skip that one because it won't work in this version of the levy, and that was a nice video that we have about the Carver levy project that is on the city's website, and I'd encourage folks to go take a look there. Communication engagement, we have probably fallen behind on the communication engagement piece because we just didn't have the money to move that effort any further than where we were at this point in time. We've done one-on-one meetings with all the affected property owners, talked to them about the survey work that was being done, talked to them about future steps in the project, and we also talked about that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. It is highly dependent on funding coming to the city of Carver and not just being, it's not a project that's fully funded by the city at this point. Then we did coordinated with the adjacent trail project, so the Merriam Trail is coming across, proposed the Minnesota River here and tying into the levee. So there's a big coordination that needs to happen there because their bridge structure for that regional trail affects the hydraulics of the Minnesota River, and it also affects the landing points on our levee, and it affects the elevation of our levee. So there's been a really good coordination between their design team and the city's design team. We've been actually sharing information in a very effective way. They've done some archaeological research that we'll reuse now with our federal requirements. We've done some wetland work and shared that, and some survey work that we've been sharing back and forth. So we're trying not to duplicate work that's being done for that project and work that's being done for the city of Carver. And then we also have some project messaging that we're trying to be consistent with across the message being consistent, the way it's presented is consistent, and the people that we're talking to are trying to be consistent as well so that we have that consistency in messaging. Kind of quells some of those rumors and thoughts or some weird things that get out there on the street once in a while, like the cars in the levee. So we did send out notification to all the property owners in 2021, and we did meet with them one-on-one. We did complete geotechnical, and this is kind of a summary. There's been a lot of work in and around the Carver levee over a number of years. So we worked with the geotechnical engineers and the folks that do the geotechnical boring, and they went through their archives, and we went through our archives at Bolton and Mink, and we pulled out all the past information, and this allowed us to really just supplement the existing information that we had. So we weren't starting from scratch. We weren't going to go out there and just jump in and say we're going to just do new borings across the whole thing. We looked at areas where we had gaps in data, or the data that we had received previously maybe wasn't very clear. So we completed those borings, and that's really drilling a hole down through the levee and then 25 feet below the levee to see what kind of materials under there and evaluate the risk and what kind of improvements we need to do to the levee to bring it up to current standards. So we did topographic surveys. So we were out there surveying the levee and making sure we know where all the points of contact of the future levee are going to be, and where buildings are going to be, and where existing trees that will need to be removed are, and what trees we can protect. How it relates to the roadways, one of the entrances to the park shown here east of the old railroad bridge is one of the areas where you'll see some significant movement in the levee in one of the future projects. So preliminary design configuration, you'll see that one of the considerations that we have to have is we want to minimize, and based on our conversations with residents too, is we want to minimize the amount of trees that need to be taken, and we want to minimize how close this levee gets to existing historic buildings and structures. And so we did an analysis that showed that we have the ability to move the levee towards the Minnesota River and not adversely affect flood elevations in the river. That's one of the things we have to show and demonstrate to the approving bodies of the DNR. It's called a no-rise certificate. So if we move the levee towards the river, we have to request a no-rise certificate and prove technically that we have not raised the flood elevation. So in this location, you'll see this is where the existing pedestrian bridge is over Spring Creek. We are proposing to move that bridge to the east Be to the west. It's never straight north-south here. I guess it would be kind of south and west a little bit. And the reason for that is to move that levee away from the structures that are adjacent to it on the west side of Spring Creek. It's very tight in there. It also will give us better accessibility from ADA requirements on slopes for trail accessibility up onto the levee.
Todd, I'm sorry, before you.
Go ahead.
Can you explain the graph that's in this picture?
Sure. The blue is the existing alignment of the trail and the bridge.
Dotted line.
Yep.
Okay.
And then the green is the proposed new alignment of the levee.
Below it, you're talking about.
As
Yep,
far
below
as-
The
it.
grid.
Yep. Oh, the grid below is,
Oh, yeah,
is
I'm
really.
sorry. I was like, how do you see?
I'm sorry, yeah.
green and
The Spring Creek sits at the bottom of that dotted line. It's the valley of Spring Creek. So that's the existing topography out there,
Okay.
existing land. And then the solid line is what we're proposing for elevation changes. So you'll see there's a little bit of change. We're raising the levee a little bit on the left side of the page. And then we're putting a bridge over the valley over the top of Spring Creek. And then we're actually raising the levee a few feet on the east side or the right side of that page. The dotted line is the existing levee, and the bold line is the proposed levee, and those numbers on the right are the elevation above sea level.
Okay, so this looks like it's being raised almost everywhere.
Yes, and that I would say that if you've been on that bridge is actually kind of arched a little bit. Most bridges are, so
yeah.
that line should go up to match the bridge.
Okay.
So we'll have that refined in final design.
Okay.
So in this figure, you have the preliminary design configuration, and this is the configuration that we're going to work with the federal government on their environmental review that will begin, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The blue lines are the existing pathway, you could say, the top of the levee that's out there today, and the green is what's proposed to be the pathway for the new levee and the levee improvements. And the biggest change you'll see is in that area of Riverside Park, the east of the railroad track, they're just above the word Minnesota River. We are shifting the levee to the east about, I want to say it's a couple hundred feet, maybe 150 feet. And the reason for that is that sight line coming under the bridge and then going back over the levee right now, you cannot see oncoming pedestrians or oncoming cars or others. The sight line, what we call the vertical curve there, doesn't meet any design standard that would be acceptable. So we have developed a design standard using standard engineering practices there, so we will now meet site design standards for the entrance into that park, and it'll improve safety in that location where you have pedestrians and vehicles and all kinds of things coming in conflict there. This is the levee that kind of shows, the dotted line there shows the existing levee location, and the green grassed area and the trail show where what we're proposing to do in several locations of the levee, and that's shifted towards the Minnesota River. So you'll see we're actually going to cut on the city side of the levee and fill on the river side of the levee. I think I covered this before with the pedestrian bridge proposed relocation. And then there are a few areas where we will need some retaining walls. We're still keeping this in our plan, but we might be able to, at our preliminary concept right now, we don't believe we're going to need too many of these. The only place would be behind Casey's, where we have a few of the homes that are very close to the levee, and it's a very steep slope. In order to get our maintenance strip at the bottom, we may need to put a small section of retaining wall there, basically from the railroad bridge up towards Casey's, to give us that maintenance strip at the bottom and to place that levee outside the limits of the structures that are below it. Riverside Park, I did talk about that already. I got ahead of myself. And this is Spring Creek. This is one of the concepts we're working at. We're trying to, a number of things here. One is try to eliminate those very steep slopes that are adjacent to it right now that have had some issues with failures in the past. The riprap being washed off the banks and having to be repaired. 3rd Street Bridge is going to be reconstructed, and we've looked at how we want that alignment to react with our future levee improvements. So we've incorporated that alignment and the elevations there to anticipate the future levee improvements. And then we want to put more of a natural stream channel in there. But to do that, we'll want to put retaining walls on inside there so that we meet the freeboard elevation, the top of the levee requirements for the FEMA certification. And then on the other side there, you'll see there's some wall and possibly a small kind of a river walk feature. That allows us to get up on top of the levee, do some maintenance, but it also allows the distance between where the levee is and the historic buildings to have a little more room behind the buildings to work with for parking or whatever it needs to happen in that location. But we will need to maintain that 15-foot maintenance beyond that toe of that retaining wall. Now, that can be a shared space, too. It doesn't have to be 100% in city's ownership, but it has to be in city ownership, but we can allow certain uses in that space.
Is that trail walk, remind me, planned on the city hall side of the creek?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. On the kind of the business side of the creek. Yeah, and this is kind of showing that alignment of Spring Creek through the Old Village area here. And the red area is kind of that river walk, and then on the other side is really just that retaining wall and trying to then blend it back into those existing contours and meet that land and try to have as little impact as we possibly can. So we do have some wetland impacts. We're evaluating these a little bit more refined now that we have the federal requirements, so we have to do some additional work here on the types of wetlands and our total wetland impact and what we need to do. One of the other things we'll have to do that we wouldn't have needed to do prior is do an archaeological review of the corridor, which means we're going to have to look at, there are some foundation ruins. You can almost see them near one of the red blobs there, the second red blob from the left. There's a little structure sticking out from underneath the blob there. So we'll have to do some field work on that this spring to make sure that we're not disturbing, or we have to find a way to preserve any significant archaeological findings in the levee envelope. And then we also have to do impact to architectural, and seeing that this is a historic district with lots of important historic architecture, there will be some write-ups on the impact of the levee improvements on the historic district in total. We don't anticipate it to be a dramatic impact because the levee's been here since 1969, and the improvements that we're proposing are to protect those structures. In addition, we don't have any major changes in elevations. We're not changing the levee by 10 or 15 feet so that these structures can't be viewed from a certain location, or these structures can't view the river from their historic sites. But we have to walk through the process. These are property impacts. Publicly owned parcels are in the green there, and private parcels are in the yellow. At some point, we will, once we get next to the 30% design, we'll define exactly the limits of those impacts, and we'll begin an easement and acquisition process if necessary. We have not defined that yet, but we are getting closer as these funds come available. We move from our preliminary design to 30% plans that will define the ultimate construction limits.
Is in that small yellow square that the Hartleys own on the river side of the levee, that's not where the wetland mitigation has to happen, is it?
That actually is where the relocation of the pedestrian bridge would be,
Okay,
is in that location.
okay. So that, what we just looked at on the last one where you said we had some wetland stuff, that is on city property?
That is on city property, yep. So funding updates, 2022 actually in the spring was kind of a busy time of the year. We had Tom Emmer out on the site, Congressman Emmer. We had the Capital Investment Committee tour, the Senate Finance Committee tour, and then we pursued some federal money with Congressman Emmer, and we did secure $2.5 million, and we're currently in the process, and that is being administered by the Housing and Urban Development, which is HUD. And so we're working with their staff on how that process is actually going to work. It's a little different way of doing it than they used to do these things. One of the things we have to remember is that federal funds can't flow directly to the city. They have to come through a federal authorized agent to receive those funds, and the city of Carver is not one of those federally authorized agents. So typically it comes through a MnDOT, a Met Council, FEMA, EPA, PCA can administer some of those funds, and then HUD is how they've chosen to run this program. So we're working with them, trying to define what elements they need to help us get through their HEROES program, which is HUD's environmental review. And so it's all an online deal, and it's the first time they've ever used it. So we're just being very patient as we walk through it. And then again, in 2022, we had no bonding bill from the Minnesota State Legislature. So let's talk about funding and the project costs. We've done a lot of work on that actually in 2022. You can see a breakdown up there that the west of segment of the levee along the Minnesota River, west of Spring Creek, it's about $2.7 million. East of Spring Creek along the Minnesota River is about $3 million, and then the levee improvements on Spring Creek is two-sided levee, so it's for every foot you go, you're building a levee on both sides of the creek. It's about $6.3 million, and so our costs from 2021 were about $11,150,000. With inflationary pressures and then also receiving federal money and having to do some additional administration of federal funds, there are a lot of new requirements that come into the process. There's Buy American provisions, there's Davis-Bacon provisions. There's a number of things that we now have to do that we wouldn't have had to do under a state-funded program. And so they will drive the cost up. So we're at about a $12 million levy project to date. Now, where's the money coming from? The Flood Mitigation Grant Program in 2023, as we sit, we're anticipating that they will fund about $8.5 million. It may not come and likely will not come to the city in one large lump sum, $8.5 million. They may meter that out over a number of years. Right now, I believe the DNR has a $20 million request in for this cycle, and I haven't had a chance to talk to Pat since the governor proposed his to see where he put the flood mitigation program in at. But we are first in line for that money in the city of Carver, so we are in a good position. Lower Minnesota River Watershed District has committed to $150,000, and they spent $75,000 of that in the preliminary design. And the city of Carver has $850,000, and the federal funds are $2.5 million. That gets us to that total project of $12 million. Now, there is some magic here to that $850,000. That is the city of Carver's donation. Let's walk through that a little bit. One of the things that we dealt with in 2022 is when we began this process, and I actually think we began this in 2019, 2018, maybe even. And
God was a boy, I think.
yeah, it was a while ago. We had a local cap on our contribution under the DNR's flood mitigation program of $2.2 million. And that was based on the 2010 census data. It was 2% of the average income times the number of households in the city of Carver. That's how you get to that $2.2 million number. In 2020, we had a new census. In 2022, the DNR updated the local contribution. So the local contribution for the city of Carver went from $2.2 million to $3.5 million, which was almost a 50% increase in contributions. So the way this breaks down, and we've had some meetings with the DNR folks, is that the local contribution is anything that comes to the levy funding outside of the state of Minnesota. So that $2.5 million that we received from the federal is part of your $3.5 million contribution. So that was a significant finding that was made in one of the conversations we had last year and got a commitment from the DNR to allow that to be part of our local match. The $150,000 from the Minnesota River Watershed District, that also was $150,000. That is eligible for offsetting that $3.5 million. The city of Carver had $50,000 in cash into the existing match with the DNR grant because we have a $150,000 grant we operated under to do preliminary design. And then we talked to the DNR because the city of Carver has been updating your lift stations and your storm sewer connections and put in new storm sewer to collect the stormwater on the dry side of the levee or the landward side of the levee and bringing it to lift stations. And those were necessary to bring you up to current standards on the lift station. And they gave us credit of local contributions of $800,000 in your existing infrastructure and capital improvements. So at this point in time, the good news is there is no further funding required from the city of Carver in assessments or taxes or otherwise as we sit here today, for the improvement of the levee, provided the state of Minnesota comes through over time with that $8.5 million. So
I was gonna say,
dramatic pause, because that doesn't happen on most projects.
I'm jumping out of my
Okay,
skin.
I'm doing it. I'm okay, all right, there we go.
Can we send them cookies?
Not if they're over $5.
Yep.
Exactly. So where are we at today, and where are we headed in 2023? Well, we have $2.5 million in federal money. We do have some things I've mentioned through this process that we need to walk through, and that's an environmental, archaeological review that has to happen. And we're in that process right now. And the city of Carver will have to front the expense of that. And then once that's completed, you then complete your federal eligibility for the grant money, and then they will release the expenditure, that money back to pay for that environmental review effort. But we won't get that money until we're done with that. We're hoping to complete that by June. Depends on how quick the reviews go at the federal level as we start submitting the information to them, and they're going to do an over-the-shoulder process with us. We hope that once we get through that, we're going to start developing the public engagement piece. We did earmark some pieces out of the federal money for public engagement. We know the public's been asking questions. I've had calls with residents, and we are keeping them up to date on where we're at. And as we continue to develop the 30% design, which is also part of the federal money, so we can start expending that, we'll have answers to some of those questions as we proceed. And then we'll continue those one-on-one meetings. We're going to continue to work with the legislature on their 2023 funding, and then obviously contact the legislature. That's an exclamation point. We have new legislators all over up there. We have changes in leadership, and so it's important for us to make sure that we keep repeating our message to the new faces and understand how important it is that how important Carver is to the state of Minnesota and our history, and also the importance of this levee is to providing protection to that history and to the many visitors to Carver and its residents. And then we're going to refine construction phasings as well. That's one of the things that we're going to have to talk about. And we won't know a lot of information about that till we get the bonding cycle and the funding cycle through this year's legislature, because then we'll know how much money we have, and then we can parcel the project off, fit the project to the budget, and then we can anticipate that in 2 years, well, next year will be another bonding cycle because they skipped one, hopefully. And so maybe we can get the remainder of the money in that bonding cycle. So we're hoping to be through the 30% design phase, which would allow us by the end of the year, hopefully, to begin conversations with landowners on the impacts of this project to them and the acquisition of easements, temporary, permanent, and any takings we have to have. So with that, and I also know, Mayor, you have some updates on some legislative efforts that you've been undertaking.
Yeah, I do.
So
So I say this with a huge, huge, huge disclaimer of when we met with the folks from the League of Minnesota Cities in Waconia, they used the analogy of like, do you like roller coasters? Because if you don't like roller coasters, being in St. Paul is not the place for you. So that's a different way of saying this might not happen, and there are going to be many ups and downs between here and the end of the session in May. But yesterday I had coffee with Senator Grutenhagen and wanted to kind of put a face with the name and meet each other, but I also had the one sheet for our levy project and wanted to go over that with him. As you guys all know, we were redistricted, and while Senator Grutenhagen is new to his role in the Senate, he's no stranger to St. Paul. He previously served for a number of years in the House of Representatives in St. Paul. So he has been very supportive of our project in that role. While I was sitting with him, he called one of his colleagues and said, hey, how much money are we in the initial bill as it sits right now? Didn't have an answer, but he followed up with me today, and Senator Grutenhagen let me know that in the Senate's bill, which is a long way to go, it has to get married to the House's bill, it has to get signed, all that kind of good stuff, but we are in for $6 million of straight bonding funds. So not through the DNR's flood mitigation grant program. So I am more than just a little bit excited about that, but trying to temper and rein it in a little bit because, again, we are 4 months away from the end of this, and a lot can happen between now and then. That said, Senator thought that the leadership of the House and Senate were going to try to get a bonding bill in sooner rather than later, and he said February. But again, like all of this is just with like asterisk after asterisk after it. So fingers crossed. I also reached out to Representative Harder, and she responded to my email. I believe that she's going to be supportive of this in the House as well. And I know that Senator Gruenhagen has connected with her, and I think that he's had more conversations with her. She is brand new to St. Paul and probably drinking from a fire hose right now. So what's going on? So that's my update that I'm really excited about. Who has questions for Todd?
So is February the next stage gate then for this?
Until it isn't, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, I think as you saw when we were in Waconia, everybody I ask is like, I try to take their temperature on the bonding bill and the likeliness of a bonding bill and what's not traditionally a bonding bill. And that's what I asked Senator Gruenhagen, and that's when he said he thought it might come as early as February. But really, the next stage gate, the only stage gate is May, whatever it is, at the end of the session.
And whatever funds they do allocate won't be available till after July 1st of this year.
You said you've already had community engagement with the affected property owners, right?
Yes.
So this is pushing away from their property. Are all of them amenable to this? What resistance might you have found?
Well, we haven't had a lot of time to go back after the preliminary design and meet with them, because we know that as we go from this preliminary design to the 30%, we want to meet with them and talk about where we're at, and then we can make some adjustments. But the budget was used up by the time we got to that, and we were hoping that we were in line for the DNR flood hazard mitigation grants last year, and that would have funded the public engagement last July. And since that didn't happen, we put everything on hold until new financing was brought forward. One of the things we have to be careful of is how and when we expend money. Each of these programs have dates when you have a go, and if you spend money before that go date, you don't get reimbursed for that. So we want to make sure that we're following the rules in those types of timelines. So there was some adjustments made in the 2020 money, and they've changed the process again at the Office of Budget and Management. So they're very strict on when you can begin spending your money. You could spend your money, but then that would be considered your local match. But since we don't need local match anymore, let's not spend your money. Let's make sure that we follow the guidelines. We can't do certain work until we sign contracts. There's certain activities we can't do under the federal program until we finish the environmental process. In fact, we can't go through any property acquisition or conversations or anything until the environmental review process is complete. Everything else gets on hold until that's done. There's certain things that protect the landowners and everything else. They want to make sure that decisions aren't made that spend capital funds before the environmental review says it's okay to do that. So there's a lot of hurdles we have to walk through and make sure we don't stumble on through this process.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
So I think the reason that it was subdued at first is because you had like a tempered, well, the good news is I was waiting for like the ball to drop, like the bad news, and is it coming, is it coming, is it coming, and it didn't. So, but I also want to say, I mean, we've all had a hand in this, but I want to say thank you to Courtney because you pushed really hard, especially at the legislative level, to make this happen. So thank you for your extra effort in doing that.
Yeah. Any other questions? Todd, I do have a question. We are roughly, although we don't have the money yet, $3.5 million into this, so that's roughly a quarter of the way there. When we've spent that $3.5 million, what does that look like? I don't think that quite gets us shovels in the ground, but is that land acquisition and final design?
Yeah, the way that we set up the federal pots of money, and the federal program is really interesting with the $2.5 million. We can move money between tasks that we say we're going to spend money in, but we can't create a new task. So what we ended up doing is we put in some public engagement, we put in land acquisition, we put in engineering and design, and then we also put in construction. So we kind of covered all our bases.
Okay.
And we put some money in each of those pots. So it does allow us to move to that 30% design and get us there. Now, if we get augmented with the state money on top of that, then we can grow the size of project that we'll have. So just off the top of my head, if we had the 2.5 plus the 6 from the DNR, I would probably want to get the bridge moved, get Spring Creek done. That's going to have the biggest impact to the property owners in and around the downtown area, but it also is going to have the biggest improvement from the standpoint of making their properties more accessible, giving them some more space to use. We know that parking's a premium down here, how they can do that, where they can store their garbage containers, all that stuff is a premium. I've had lots of conversations with the property owners that abut the levee. We do have some utility work that needs to be done there. There is some unknowns on where people's sanitary connections and water main and all those things run between the levee and the back of their buildings in some places. So we want to get all those questions answered and get those new utilities in the ground too. That'll really help us understand exactly where all those limits will be and the impacts to the individual property owners.
Thank you. All right, any other questions? No. All right, thank you. I appreciate the update.
you.
It's good seeing you.
Good seeing you.
All right, we have no public hearings this evening. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
A motion by Councilmember Mock
I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Sayer. Would you mind taking the roll?
Councilmember Sayer,
I, Lori Sayer.
Councilmember Mock,
I, Christy Mock.
Councilmember Pershman,
Hi, Eric Hirschman.
Mayor Johnson.
Aye, Courtney Johnson. All right, motion passes. Business items, number 8.1, the legislative priorities. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The City Council annually considers legislative priorities to send to our state legislators. So this year we'll have 2 new ones, Senator Gruenhagen and Representative Harder. The priorities look similar to what you adopted in 2022 with one addition. So I'll run through each of them. First one, apropos, it's related to funding for flood protection infrastructure. I did notice I did make a change to the estimated project cost. Right now we have 11.2, so we'll update that to 12 million. But essentially what we're asking for is for support from the state for increased or continued funding for the flood hazard mitigation grant assistance program. Number 2 is related to remote participation in city council meetings. This has really come up in the last few years. We've had instances prior to the pandemic where we've had council members want to participate remotely, but the current state law requires that remote location be accessible to the public. As it states in our priority, I think the city of Carver has proven, as well as many other cities and counties, that remote participation can happen effectively, efficiently, and transparently without making that location accessible to the public, i.e. someone's home or hotel room, etc. And so we're asking the legislature to make that change to the open meeting law to require or to allow remote participation. Number 3 relates to protecting local control and opposing preemption. Every so often, whether it's related to items related to the budget or other pieces, the state at times considers a new state law or legislation that would preempt city council's ability to make decisions. So, for example, at one point, this wasn't last session, but several sessions ago, where there was a proposed legislation that would have required a referendum vote on the annual budget. And so what city councils, for the most part around the state, support is the concept of mayor and councils being elected to the positions to make those decisions and opposing legislation that would add extra elements to that decision-making process. Number 4, infrastructure fees. This relates to kind of connection fees, building permit fees that are often subject to scrutiny from the building community that says that maybe the cities are charging more than they need to. locally in Carver, we've taken considerable lengths to prove out our connection fees via our long-term financial plan. We went through a process to prove out our building permit fees by having a business assessment done by ABDO, but that is on a pretty consistent basis for the last several years under attack. And so we're looking to get that protected or have that protected by our representatives. Number 5 relates to special assessment election requirements. This is something I reviewed with Councilmember Pershman, but several of you were aware of when we went through some of our reconstruction projects in the downtown. We're required using the 429 process, our special assessment process, to assess 20% of the project costs, and that's been in place for decades. What we found by going through a process where we hire an appraiser and do a special benefit analysis, it can sometimes be very challenging to hit that 20% mark. And so asking the state to reduce that to 15% based on kind of the current conditions and kind of the right way to do things. And then the last piece is the new piece, and this is related to some topics that have come up in the last year related to the regulation of cannabinoid products. I think I'm saying that correctly. Approved in the pharmacy bill last year at the state, but really no regulatory framework for it. And so just kind of reiterating the need, although I'm sure it's at top of mind, is kind of providing a local perspective that providing some guidance on regulations and public safety, public health are an important issue for the city of Carver. So happy to answer any questions. I also included in your packet the League of Minnesota Cities City Policy Guide. So if there are other policies that you'd like to have considered for inclusion, feel free to add those or discuss those as a council. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to mention number 6 for the regulations. At first I thought, well, do we even need this in here? Because I want to make sure that things that are really, really important to the top get noticed the most. But I do think it fits in line with the reason that we chose as a city council not to do a moratorium, is that we wanted to turn it back to the state legislature to make those decisions because it was their approvals that put it in place in the first place. So I'm fine leaving it in, and I think again it goes along with what our intent was with having it. I guess not to put the moratorium in effect.
Yeah, and that kind of dovetails in, Eric. Just last year, we took a good long look and really kind of skinnied down the list that we had when we were looking at the draft at this point exactly a year ago, because we kind of argued if we have, I don't remember the number, but like even if we have 9 priorities, is it really a priority? So the theory, and I remember speaking about like if we have priorities, we should all be able to rattle them off, like levies, local control, infrastructure, and cannabinoids, like 3 weeks from now, there'll be a pop quiz, but really being able to focus so that we're super clear to our folks in St. Paul of what's important to us here in Carver.
Is this a wish list whittled down from a larger list?
Last year it was. This year it's pretty much a carbon copy.
Okay.
With the addition of number 6, the cannabinoids.
And I think that's top of the current legislative session, isn't it?
Any other, Lori? Nope.
This is going to sound strange, but is number 6 a different color green than the rest of the headers? Because it looks different to me. Can you just check to make sure that it doesn't look like we're highlighting number 6 as our most important?
Inverse triangle.
There's a joke in there somewhere.
Wrong color green, Brent? There's a lot of jokes in there.
All right. I will make a motion to adopt the 2023 legislative priorities.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mayor Johnson and a second by Councilmember Mock. Any further discussion? Could you call a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Sayer,
I, Lori Sayer.
Councilmember Mock,
Aye, Christy Mock.
Councilmember Pershman,
Aye, Eric Pershman.
and Mayor Johnson.
Aye, Courtney Johnson. All right, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, down to communications 9.1 monthly reports.
Well, this is an item from the city manager's report in the work session, but I just wanted to address again, there's a resident who had a concern regarding garbage service and was advocating for single collection, et cetera. And I, advocated for her to, the best way to address that is with the council and community comment. But she, at this point, wasn't willing to do that. So I just said I would at least mention the topic to the council during my next update. I'm not looking for necessarily any action, but I did tell her that I would share that. I would, you can add it to a work session, you can just listen to it and move on, but just wanted to follow through on that request from a resident.
Right. Thank you.
Did you want comment on
I was
that
going to
or
say,
no?
let's go down the line
Yeah.
with our updates, and we can choose to comment on it or not.
Then, during our update?
Yeah, okay. All right.
What was the ask to limit it to one, one service?
Yeah, the concern originated that the service that she's being provided is expensive, and I encouraged her. She hadn't at that point reached out to other vendors, but then as a kind of an add-on is she found value in to ensure maybe better pricing for the city to contract with one hauler.
I'm sorry, did you say she had not shopped around?
Correct. But she was advocating for the city to contract with one hauler, not only from a cost perspective, but from a impact of public infrastructure, i.e. streets perspective. And then I shared some perspectives related to other cities throughout the state, the metro. You don't have to, you just have to do a Google search and you can see that's been a contested issue. There are pros and cons. So I'm not looking to open Pandora's box to have encourage the council to do a full-blown discussion on it, but did want to try to accommodate her request if she didn't feel comfortable addressing the council directly. So does that answer your question?
It does, yeah.
Yep.
Thanks for expanding. I like the setup we have where each resident can choose their own service and shop around. Otherwise, I just feel like it's that word monopoly. I understand maybe some cities limit what days but I don't really know how much that, other than you wouldn't want the same service provider to come in twice a week because now they have their trucks on the road twice versus once. But, I don't know that would solve what our concern was. So I don't support making a change.
Any other updates?
No. Oh, yeah. Oh, so and the update is no update. So
Okay. Okay. All right, sounds good. Christy.
Okay. To talk a little bit about the garbage hauler. Brent, do we have 2 carriers in town or 3?
3, and they're restricted to providing service on Thursday and
Fridays, yeah,
Fridays for
okay.
residential anyway.
So I would not be in favor of going down to one hauler. I've watched this pretty closely as it went through the city of Bloomington, and it was really ugly. But not because I'm afraid of that, but because I saw all the size and what was coming out of it, and I really thought about it a number of years ago as they were going through it. And really it takes out that free market aspect where you don't have a choice then. So now if you have one hauler and you don't like their service, you're stuck with them. You have no choice to choose. You also, they have a monopoly then. But they choose their pricing then at this point, right? You can't go to another company and say, can I get a better deal? This company could raise prices as high as they want because they have the contract with the city. So I don't think it's probably in the best interest that we have a single hauler here. I can see for myself, I see more problems than it arising that's going to solve. But I appreciate her reaching out with her perspective. My other one is January 28th, Soggy Bottom is coming up, so I would look forward to seeing everybody down there. It is a great, great fundraiser we do for folks in town in medical crisis. So you don't have to play golf. I've had some questions. I'm sure, again, all of the people who are watching right now, Courtney, are
Tons and tons.
Yep. You don't have to play. You can come down and have a beverage, have a hot dog, enjoy the fire, play some bean bags. We will collect, monies from you however you'd like to spend them. If you decide you want to golf, that's what gets you the hat, the commemorative hat, and then you can obviously play that way. So I do want to thank and pre-thank the city, because I know the city and the fire department helps out a great deal with this event. So public services and the fire department, we could not do this without your assistance. So thanks to those departments.
All right, so what about a single day collection? Is that something we can explore? Is there a reason we can't do that? So keep multiple vendors, but limit it to one day. That lessens the number of days trucks are on the street, garbage cans are visible. Is that something we can entertain?
I believe so. I'd have to follow up with the city attorney. I mean, it's in ordinance that you're allowed Thursday and Friday, but so we'd just have to check if the council is interested. We'd just have to see if there are any constraints on limiting the number of days.
But also maybe constraints on the garbage haulers too. That's a lot in one city at one time when they.
Well, two of them are operating on the same day, right?
But I think one of them splits days too.
Okay.
Yeah, I see Southwest come through. Or SW.
I don't know if that's feasible or not. I don't know from the provider standpoint if that's feasible. Growing up in Chaska, it was one day. And at that time, the community was about the same size as Chaska. Or, I'm sorry, as Carver. So, but restricting it to one carrier, I agree that's problematic. So I would only explore the option of limiting it to one day. And I have no other updates.
All right. Let's see. Before I get into my updates, I'll address garbage. You know, like you, Christy, I watched St. Paul when they did it. And while that may be, what did they say, an apples to elephants, apples to giraffes comparison, I don't think the city of Carver is in the garbage business. So, you know, if I called last week because I wasn't aware that last week's ice storm delayed my service. You know, like the city of Carver doesn't need to be answering garbage calls or complaints. So, and despite who the carrier is, if it's a city service, that's definitely the phone right here will ring. So, I've just seen it go wrong in too many different ways. So I don't think that that's a service that we need to provide or to go through to our community. Let's see. Updates from me. We had a Southwest Transportation Alliance meeting on January 6th, just the first meeting of the year. Went through budgets and reviewed that. Welcomed a few new members. Last week I connected with Greg Amott. He is the new-ish editor of the Chaska Herald. So during the election cycle, when I was speaking to him somewhat regularly, I said, let's talk once things calm down a little bit and have you out to Carver and kind of get a better idea of our community. In my mind's eye, we were going to walk through downtown, but he came last Wednesday, which was the day of the ice storm, so none of us would have been doing too much walking. So, but connected with him, and they're hiring a bunch of folks at the Chaska Herald. If you've noticed, the papers are getting pretty thin, but he has some ideas of expanding coverage, specifically Carver coverage, which has also been very light lately, and I kind of shared that with him, and we talked about that. Last Friday we had a community leaders meeting. So that is the group that is the city managers, mayors from all four of the communities in the school district, and then the Carver County board. So lots of good stuff from that meeting. What was really interesting is Dr. Sales Adams shared, speaking of weather, the process for calling off schools. So she said that there are people, district employees who are driving at 3 in the morning, kind of testing out the streets. The National Weather Service generally has a webinar at 4 in the morning. She said that the calls back and forth and the text chains are unreal. So that's a long way of saying, and she stressed that to call off school or to even put in a 2-hour delay is not a process that is taken lightly or that is just an easy call to make. But it was kind of cool to kind of see that curtain peeled back a little bit and hear it from her how it happens.
Who gets to be the guinea pig that has to go on?
We didn't ask. Nobody asked. I would imagine it's probably employees who are like the furthest, you know, like
No ride-alongs?
maybe there's a third grade teacher who lives in New Germany and trying to figure out if they can make it in or not.
If they
Maybe-
slip on the way to the car, the day is called off. If they
Yeah.
drive, it's 2 hours.
I think she did say the transportation folks are out driving buses early too to kind of test it. Am I making that up? Okay. Okay. Let's see. I mentioned about connecting with Senator Gruenhagen yesterday. I was on Mayor Monday on K-Check, which is the radio station out of New Prague, and that was super fun and always kind of. I was shoehorned in there at the last minute, but it was great, and I was able to make it work. And then I just wanted to reinforce what you said. You know that I've been to the side and bottom more than a few times. I've not golfed once. But there's always, like, unless you get there too late. I got there too late last year, but there's always hot dogs and food and have a little adult beverage in your cocoa or whatever. It's just a good time to go and meet your neighbors at the end of January and do the Minnesota thing and be outside. So all for a good cause. Last but not least, I was recently invited to the Getaway Motor Cafe because they had a barista training, and I had one good latte. So I believe that they are doing a kind of a friends and family event this weekend, and then I don't know how public they're going to make it, but if you were in that area, I would walk past there frequently early next week. So that is it for me. Any other comments? All right, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
A motion by Councilmember Pershman,
I'll second.
and a second by Councilmember Sayer. Would you mind doing your last roll call vote?
Councilmember Sayer,
Aye, Lori Sayer.
Councilmember Mock,
Aye, Christy Mock.
Councilmember Pershman,
I, Eric Pershman.
and Mayor Johnson.
Hi, Courtney Johnson. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you so much for your help.
Yeah, thank you.